Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today's episode is brought to you by AgencyQ, an award-winning team that believes in the power of experience, creating technology and customer experiences that work in harmony to break down barriers to personal interactions and serve people as individuals. Today, we're going to talk about creating great customer experience in highly regulated industries. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Meghan Fishburn, SVP Client Strategy at AgencyQ. Meghan, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this topic with you. Certainly something that I've got my fair share of experience with as well, so we can talk through this stuff here. But why don't we start by you giving a little background on yourself as well as what AgencyQ does?
Sure. So AgencyQ is a marketing technology professional services firm, and we specialize in combining human-centered design and technology like Sitecore, et cetera, to deliver better customer experiences. So while we work with clients across different industries, we really have a specialty in working with customers in these highly regulated industries. So I lead our strategy and account management team. So my role is working with our clients to understand their goals and help shape their CX strategy through the use of technology. And then prior to AgencyQ, I worked for a branding firm serving the financial services clients. So I've been in this regulated space for about 12 years now.
Great. So let's get started with our discussion here and maybe start with some definitions, since we're here to talk about creating great customer experiences in regulated industries. First, how would you define customer experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question because it's one of those terms that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when we talk about CX, we're talking about the totality of experiences that a customer has with your organization or your agency across different channels, touch points, mediums. So by comparison, in the digital space, it often gets used interchangeably with user experience or UX, and that's really more narrow. It's about what the user is doing at a single point of interaction. So we're really looking at, the full user journey.
Great. And then, when we talk about regulated industries, what does that include?
So regulated industries are those that have strict policies that are governed by, for example, HIPAA in the healthcare space or any number of laws governing federal agencies. These are agencies that often have tight data governance rules, information security policies, et cetera. So we really specialize in healthcare, federal government agencies, mostly on the civilian side, and then, like large manufacturing corporations.
Great. So now let's talk a little bit, now that we have definitions out of the way, let's talk about what brands in these industries can do to improve their customer experience. So first, what are some of the key challenges that brands in these regulated industries have when trying to optimize their customer experience? So to make it more specific, why don't we start with healthcare?
Yeah. So first of all, overarching with a lot of these regulated industries, one of the challenges is that they have a lot of different technical systems in play that an organization can have. Large organizations can have, upwards of a dozen. And whether that's their content management system, marketing automation, CRM, et cetera, it becomes very hard to create consistent, well-orchestrated experiences across each of these platforms. Also, in these industries, the systems can be very specific. So it's common for these organizations to let the technical requirements really drive the customer experience. And of course, that's really backwards. So
Yeah.
specific to healthcare, I'll speak primarily for provider organizations in this. Of course, there's payers and pharma, and they are kind of their own beasts in many ways. But they can have, 10 plus systems, including like an electronic health record system or an EHR. And due to HIPAA regulations, you have to be very careful about the data that you collect. Things like name, email, geographic location that another commercial organization may personalize on, those can be considered, personally identifiable information or PII or, even PHI. Additionally, within healthcare, we've worked with a number of children's hospitals, et cetera. There's a high degree of emotion in this audience. So, think of parents or caretakers coming to interact with your information. They're already high anxiety, nervous about a sick child, et cetera. So if it's not simple and straightforward and you don't create that empathy for your audiences, you're really going to have a hard time breaking through. And, within healthcare, call them patients, call them consumers, they do have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to those B2C organizations that you work with, you also work with some B2B organizations. What are some of the unique challenges here?
Sure. So in addition to, the disparate, sometimes dated technology that can often be in use here, one of the big challenges with B2B audiences is that they easily lose sight of the fact that while their customers are other companies or corporations, at the end of the day, their buyers are still people. They bring the same expectations as a B2C consumer. So, people buy emotionally, they justify rationally. We all know that. So, the same care needs to go into the CX. And B2B companies, particularly those that are large holding companies with different subsidiaries, they commonly fall into the trap of letting their internal organization or structure become their external experience, which is never good for the customer. It creates a lot of headaches and confusion.
Yeah, definitely. AgencyQ works in the government or the public sector space as well. You mentioned some, earlier on some of the data challenges and things, but how is this unique in terms of some of those other challenges as well?
Well, bureaucracy is real.
Right.
But, joking aside, there's a lot that's unique to the space. So public sector is really interesting in that they're both innovators and laggards at the same time. So as a very simplistic example, take, Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act that requires websites to be navigable by users who are visually impaired. Think color contrast, think alt tags on images that can be read by screen readers, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That has been required for years for all government sites to be 508 compliant, but only in recent history has that come over to the private sector. You may have heard about the famous Domino's Pizza suit of them being sued for, not being compliant. So when its enforcement is primarily focused on the public sector, government sites really had this reputation of very staid design, et cetera, and clunky experiences because it had to be 508 compliant. As it has made its way to the private sector, you're seeing more evolution in making more modern looking designs that are also accessible. My point being with the public sector that especially in the digital space, you often see a very conservative, and I don't mean politically, risk-averse interpretation of these legislative rules that, of course, really drive the experience, and that can really hinder your customer experience. That's fortunately evolving as you see more private sector talent being called to do their public sector tour of duty.
Right.
And additionally, there are new regulations in place like 21st Century Idea Act that actually mandates particularly civilian agencies to improve their customer experience, which has made it a much bigger priority for a lot of agencies.
Yeah.
Federal agencies also really struggle because they have such disparate audiences that they have to serve. So, scientists, government funders, journalists, things like that. So it becomes really hard to take their vast amounts of information and personalize them into different audience segments.
Yeah. I would imagine the audience segmentation alone, and what is customer experience when there are so many different types of customers, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're like many marketing leaders today, you're inundated with a need to improve the customer experience across an increasing number of channels and touch points, all while ensuring your team is performing well, innovating, and continuously improving. So how do you find the time to determine what's next for you, your team, your brand, and your customers? My company, GK5A, can help. Whether it is advisory services, evaluation of marketing technology platforms and solutions, or digital agencies and implementation partners, or assistance with creating strategic roadmaps and prioritization of efforts, we've done it all and served as an ally to Fortune 1000 brands in industries like financial services, healthcare, consumer electronics, professional services, and more. You can learn more about these services and contact us at www.gk5a. That's www.gk5a.com. Now let's get back to the show.
You started talking about the challenges. Let's talk about some of the solutions in those industries that we mentioned already, and really make it broad to any highly regulated industry. What are some of the ways that the leaders in some of these categories, some of these regulated industries, are thinking and ultimately doing about improving their CX?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the best frameworks that I've used when talking about CX, there are kind of 3 points and somewhat of a reinforcing cycle. So the first is create a simple, easy journey for the user. In these regulated industries, there can be a really complex back-end process, and there can be a lot of different systems that a user has to interact with. But the front-end user experience needs to be very simple. And this is where tools like journey mapping and empathy mapping and tying them together are really important to highlight those critical inflection points and areas that are a risk for causing users confusion. The second is show them that you know them. So companies talk about conducting surveys and doing deep user research, which is super important, but what are you actually doing with that data? Those findings not only need to be represented with how you interact with your customers, but oftentimes explicitly stating to show we heard you and this is what we're doing about it. And then lastly, do it for them. And this is where strategies like personalization can really come into play in highly regulated industries. Speaking of the federal government, one of our clients is the largest publisher of basic scientific research in the world, and that information has to be available and make sense to everyone from, a third grade science teacher to a world-class particle physicist. So we use the Sitecore platform, which is known for its personalization capabilities, to help users find what they're looking for faster and more accurately. So if you've looked at, ABC pieces of content, we infer that you're most likely a government funder, so we'll show you, this piece of content first.
Yeah.
So that gives organizations a good way to think about their CX, but equally important to remember is use your research, technology, your data to highlight a few key inflection points and work from there. Trying to do everything all at once, it's not sustainable or productive. And that's true for highly regulated industries or commercial as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so, you mentioned the strategic use of the right platform to offer personalized experience. What about building skill sets? So, how should these organizations look at building skill sets, whether it's in-house versus partnering with external agencies and consultancies? Certainly, there's benefits both ways, right? How should they look at this?
Sure. So obviously I'm a little biased in this viewpoint, working with AgencyQ, and we've worked in a hybrid of different models from, white glove to, take care of this to staff augmentation to a combination. But what I've seen to be most successful is really a partnership where you're hiring external agencies and partners to get you started and for the big stuff. So, strategy, technical implementation, et cetera, and then working to ensure that you have a team internally who can help sustain those recommendations. Then you work together on an ongoing basis to adjust and optimize as you need to or develop the next thing. And a couple reasons for this is one, bandwidth. Oftentimes, the teams that we work with have other responsibilities. So something like CX strategy, that's a big thing to tackle, it easily falls by the wayside. And then two, from an external perspective, we regularly see when we do stakeholder interviews that staff or even consumers can be more candid and they're more comfortable giving their honest feedback than they are with, internal staff members or colleagues.
Yeah.
And then, lastly, I would be remiss not to obviously bring security into this, particularly when you're talking about the highly regulated industries. Give your privacy and InfoSec teams a seat at the table early and often during the CX strategy and execution phase. Gaining their input early really allows you to construct the CX strategy and implement it in partnership rather than being denied later, which, can be very expensive to fix.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, you touched on a couple things that certainly the benefits of external consultancies. I think it is true. Like you're able to focus on getting the project initiative, whatever it is, done and not getting dragged into the day to day, which, there's inevitably going to be a million things day to day that, full-time employees are gonna need to deal with. I think another thing that comes to mind as well is just the view that you have, kind of the external view of, you're working across not only different clients in the same industry, which is incredibly valuable to just kind of see best practices and things like that, but also even just co-opting best practices from other industries. And I think also, what healthcare can learn from another highly regulated industry like financial services or public sector. I think there's best practices to learn. And to your earlier point, different industries move at different paces. And even the same industry, I thought you made a great point there, like government moves at two different paces depending on what you're talking about. And so
Right.
it's nothing is cut and dry, in that way. So I think that is also a benefit of just an external perspective.
Yeah, and it's an interesting balance between, customers want you to know their business and know their industry, but, to your point, it really helps to bring that external perspective. If you're commonly working within the public sector but have private sector experience, we're increasingly hearing, what have you done in the private sector, because they are hungry for that innovation and fresh perspective. So it's an interesting dynamic to the industry that, I think it always has to be a partnership between internal resources and external, but external can really help you get going.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it takes smart people on both ends, right? So it takes people internal to the organization that really know how to, like, having run an agency before, and there were a good client wasn't just a client that said yes to everything that we suggested. A good
Oh,
client
100%.
was actually one that really understood, okay, you're suggesting this, but it really needs to be like this in order to make sense in our business. And so let's figure that out. And, so that it's that, I think what you're saying, the partnership there is so key. And, definitely, but everybody needs to understand as much as they can, but there's also that reconciliation sort of in the middle. There's some valuable stuff that happens there.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the most fulfilling areas of a partnership too is, I think one of the things we're seeing with a lot of our partners is that, they're so much more sophisticated these days too.
Yeah.
They really know their business. They really know their metrics, and what they want to push forward. And so to be able to have really that team structure, that combined team structure, is what makes it the most fun too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so how are these organizations measuring success when they're looking at improving CX and doing an initiative with an agency like yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, the easy answer is it depends.
Sure.
But for the industries that we've been talking about, some of the most common ones are, let's say, for healthcare, patient satisfaction, referrals from other providers, et cetera. For B2B, it can be sales, it can be employee NPS. I know, you've talked on the show before about that there's a strong connection between employee experience and customer experience.
Yeah.
It can be things like time saved, reduction in call center activities. And then for federal, it may be compliance with a law like 508 compliance or 21st century idea in meeting the requirements of a given grant. Federal is much more mission focused. So any KPIs that align with their overall mission, even if it's freeing up time for the team to allow them to focus on their role in that mission, is, often something we're seeing in terms of measuring success.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, Megan, thanks so much for joining. One last question for you before we wrap up here. So you've given a lot of great advice already. So for those organizations in the highly regulated industries that we've been talking about, what's maybe one piece of advice that you'd have for them as they're planning to improve their customer experience in the months ahead?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is a topic I'm very passionate about and
Yeah,
love talking on. So thank you so much for having me.
of course.
But in terms of advice, It's simple to say, sometimes hard to do, but start. Look at your data, your tech stack, dedicate time to conversations with internal and external stakeholders. Use your partners to help make space and lead you through it. It's hard to find time among competing priorities and in this economy, limited budgets, but the right partner will help you prioritize and build your roadmap. And there's often a greater cost to doing nothing. So, even if it's one small piece of your journey that, you can help take something that's currently a negative part of your experience and bring it up to a neutral or a positive, or something that's neutral and bring it to a positive, that can have a big impact, whether it's your bottom line or, like I said, freeing up time to focus on your mission as an agency. It's a journey worthwhile starting.
Yeah. Great advice. Love it. Well, again, I'd like to thank Meghan Fishburn, SVP Client Strategy at AgencyQ, for joining the show. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, AgencyQ, an award-winning team that believes in the power of experience, creating technology and customer experiences that work in harmony to break down barriers to personal interactions and serve people as individuals. You can learn more about Meghan and AgencyQ by following the links in the show notes.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GregKihlstrom.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.